Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for breaking your lunch and joining us today for this side event on political leadership for education in emergencies and protracted crisis. My name is Joseph Nahn O'Reilly, and I'm the founder and executive director of the International Parliamentary Network for Education, abbreviated as IPNED. We do what it says on the tin. We're a global network of parliamentarians, some of whom are on this panel, others of whom are in the audience. And our mission is to generate the political commitment and support and understanding of education so that we accelerate SDG 4. So when Education Cannot Wait was established at the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016, it was established with three principal functions. The first of which was to improve coordination of education in emergencies across the world and the sector. The second was, unsurprisingly, and it's great that we're here today doing exactly that, increasing the funding and improving the quality of the funding for education within humanitarian response. And the third function that Education Cannot Wait was established with was to generate political commitment to education in emergencies. Because we know, although I have to say I've been doing this for a while, we've come a long way. And today really exemplifies that, the speeches, the engagement, the number of people who are here. But nevertheless, education within humanitarian context remains marginal. It's not really at the centre of that discussion. I can't tell you how many arguments I've had with humanitarians about the fact that education is not or should not be a first response. And of course, we would all argue that it should be, that education should not be interrupted because of disasters, because of conflict, and because of displacement. Quite the contrary. And so what we're doing at IPNED, and our remit is broader than education in emergencies, but we're focused on this issue because we think it's absolutely critical to build parliamentary and political understanding of the issue, the challenge, and the solutions. And that's why we're gathering here today with lots of parliamentarians in the room, amongst other things, to launch something that we've developed with our colleagues who are co-hosting this event, the Geneva Hub for Education in Emergencies. This declaration, which you should all have, or if you don't, you will in a second, we'll get them to be distributed throughout the room. Nicole, could you maybe make sure that people have access to the declaration, if they don't already? I think they were at the front. And so it does exactly what I said. It's a statement of both concern and commitment. It sets out why we are concerned about the status of education in humanitarian crises. And it talks about how that issue can be resolved, and that it invites parliamentarians to commit to taking actions to moving that needle and solving that problem. And that's what we're going to hear a little bit about today. So that's why we're here, but let's start the proceedings with our first speaker. I couldn't really think of anyone better to speak on this panel because David brings both dimensions of this work and personifies that in the single person. He was a member of Parliament. He was, of course, the UK's Foreign Secretary, and he is now the CEO and President of the International Rescue Committee, one of the largest humanitarian organisations in the world. And I'm delighted that he accepted our invitation today and that we're going to hear from him about what we're trying to do and why it's so important. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Joseph, and good afternoon, everyone. I have to confess to feeling a slight sense of imposter syndrome at this interparliamentary network, since I'm no longer a parliamentarian. So you're very broad-minded to have allowed me in here. The reason I'm here is that at the International Rescue Committee, we don't define humanitarian work in a narrow way as being just about survival. We define humanitarian work as being about helping people to, yes, survive, but also to thrive. And if they're to thrive, especially those who are facing the greatest inequalities, especially women and girls, if they're going to be able to thrive, they need education, they need employment, as well as healthcare, water and sanitation, and the basics. And I just want to use my 5 minutes to try and lay out what I see as a genuine challenge for us, because Joseph is right that some of us have been at this for quite a long time, but for far too many parts of the humanitarian community and for far too many parts of the humanitarian system, education is marginal. It's almost a luxury. It's not the lifeline that really it is. And I think understanding why that's happened is important if we're going to try and crack this problem. We're meeting at a time when there is much more humanitarian need than for a very long time. Essentially, the number of people in food insecurity has tripled in the last 5 years. And the numbers that I have in mind are 3. There are 54 active conflicts going on around the world at the moment, 8 of them counting as major conflicts with more than 1,000 battlefield deaths. There are 100 million people on the move as refugees or displaced people, about 45 million refugees and asylum seekers, 55 million displaced, and 340 million people in humanitarian need. So the needs are going up, and a lot of the traditional bilateral budgets are going down. And so there's a real squeeze. I would say to you in all candor, education has got the fight of its life to keep its share, never mind to grow its share of the humanitarian budget. And we all know the share is below 3%, I think I'm right in saying.
Yes.
So I also picked up a couple of figures, which I think are relevant to just understanding the problem. We published our emergency watch list for 2023 in December, the IRC emergency watch list. It's the 20 countries with the greatest likelihood, according to 67 different data points, of humanitarian crisis in the year ahead. And there's lots of interesting stuff there. But here's something that I think is really striking. In 2005, the number of what were called protracted crises, i.e. long-term crises, was 13. By 2019-20, it was 31. So you can immediately see that there is compound crisis, which is deepening the injury that people face and increasing the squeeze on education. And I think if we don't understand that context, we're going to struggle. Just some figures about the refugee side of it. And in primary school, 68% of refugees are actually in school. That's slightly boosted, frankly, by the number who've come from Ukraine, because the provision for Ukrainian refugees in Europe is much, much greater than the provision for refugees from Myanmar into Bangladesh or in many other parts of the world. Secondary level, though, 34%, higher education, 5%. So the first point I just want to say is I think we've got to be honest with ourselves. We can't just use these meetings to preach to the choir. We've got to really brainstorm about how to get out beyond the choir with some thinking about how to break this, to crack open this code. Now, to crack the code, what do we have to think about? I just want to put 5 quick things on the table for you to think about. And by the way, I really apologize. I just have to leave at about 3 minutes to 1. I'm sorry about that. But I hope to catch at least 2 of the other speakers. The obvious place to start is with the quantity of people who are, the quantity of kids who are missing out on education or not getting good enough education. That's the 222 million. That's not where I want to start. I think if we're going to crack this code, we have to start with the quality of educational provision. Because I believe that we've got to convince policymakers that kids in crisis are not doomed to have no education or bad education. Because that is a syndrome that I've seen, that the interruptions for education from conflict or from climate crisis are almost seen as too big to make a difference. We now have, I think it's fair to say, IRC is the largest impact evaluation agency in the educational space. It's certainly true across, we're only 3% of the global humanitarian budget, but we're 35% of all the impact evaluations that are done in the humanitarian sector across the piece. But we know that for young kids, but also for older kids, there are impactful interventions that can change their lives. And I think that quality of education is a really important thing to put in front of policymakers. Secondly, we shouldn't be afraid of scale as well as impact. So that's where the quantity question comes in. And I do think we've got to be stronger in warning against more boutique small programs. I mean, we've all had government donors or corporate donors who want to have a new program and they want it to be special and new. Well, actually, we need to scale what works, not reinvent the wheel. Quantity. Thirdly, we do need education. There's different kinds of challenge now being faced by different kids in different parts of the world, especially as the climate crisis grows. But we're doing a lot of work in Colombia and Ecuador for Venezuelan refugees. There's a different set of issues in South America that I think are important, and also a different set of resources. WhatsApp, new technology, telephones, radios, not just thinking in traditional quote unquote schooling. So there's an innovation part of the agenda, and linked to innovation is being serious about data, where we continue to have major problems. Fourth point, we're very struck in our work about the importance of linking education to other risks that kids and carers face in humanitarian crisis. That the educational loss that we understandably focus on is only one part of the risk that young people face in the midst of crisis. There are protection risks, there are health risks, there are frankly food risks, because school is an important place that people are fed. And we're really excited about some work we're doing around anticipating climate events and then taking anticipatory action in advance of those events to protect kids and their carers, both from the educational disadvantages that can come from the interruption of education, but also from protection, health, and food risk. And then fifth and finally, we must think about flexibility and innovation in funding, not just in programming. And that means really putting the pressure on for new thinking from the international development, the financial institutions, the World Bank, the other multilateral development institutions, because it's not just going to be bilateral aid or government budgets that are the answer. I think that's my 5 minutes. Give an ex-politician a platform and he'll speak for longer than he's invited to, so I want to try and... Say again? Well, yes, I'm not paid to speak. I'm meant to pay, so I'm trying to avoid that. I'm trying to avoid that syndrome. Where I would conclude is as follows. We need an investment argument, but we also need a reform argument. Yes. The reform argument is about cost effectiveness and cost efficiency of educational interventions. We are proud to be an NGO that is transparent about its cost effectiveness and its cost efficiency. We need that to spread across the sector, because we need every dollar, not just, we don't just need to double every dollar, we need to make sure that every dollar goes further. Thanks very much indeed.
Terrific. Thank you so much, David. Lots of food for thought there, and terrific kind of suggestions about the sorts of things that parliamentarians in their role as legislators, as shapers of budgets and as providers of scrutiny can take on to improve this area. So I was very pleased to see that some of the stars from this morning are in the room, and we were also delighted that the Minister from South Sudan was going to join us. I spoke to her earlier. She was very keen to come, but she's actually in the press conference that's being held at the moment, so she may well get here before we're finished. But so we're going to continue to proceed, but acknowledge that she was the next person that was supposed to speak. The other thing I just want to say is we're really going to try and make this as much of a conversation as possible. And I know that there are quite a few of you in the room who want to speak and have something to share. And so with that in mind, we will keep our remarks brief and then turn to you. So without further ado, I'm going to call on Nicholas Walder. So Nicholas is here because he is a member of the Swiss National Assembly. And I think it's right that you represent Geneva in the Swiss National Assembly. So the Geneva Declaration is very much, aligned to that. But most importantly, Nicholas, and he's going to talk about this, so I won't say much about it, led an effort to have education and emergencies recognised by his colleagues in French-speaking parliaments all around the world by working with the Global Assembly of French-speaking parliaments and Francophone parliaments. So with that in mind, he did some fantastic work on this, both in the Swiss Parliament and globally. And in fact, the Geneva Declaration, which you have in front of you, refers to their work and draws on that for inspiration. So we're really taking much of what they did and globalising it. Nicholas.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Ladies and gentlemen, dear parliamentarians, it's an honor for me to be here in my town, but of course it's such an international place, and also with such a great assembly, and to discuss about this most important subject on education for everybody, and education for all the people in all situations. Just to give you a few info about the Parliamentary Assembly for Francophonie. That's the Parliamentarian Association of Francophonie. You have the OIF and IOF, and you have the APF, which is parliamentarian. It has been created before IOF, and it's very active to reunite parliamentarians among the French-speaking and French countries and territories. We have 90 members, approximately half of them are countries. So in the spring 2020, between March and July, more than 95% of children, young people in the French-speaking world were affected by the closure of schools and training institutions, 95%. That's why during that period, the Swiss delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of Francophonie conducted a comparative study on the educational challenges during the COVID period. Remember, it was the first part of the COVID period and most of the schools were closed. And a lot of countries didn't know how to deal with that, even in our country. One of the first findings of the study was that the vast majority of states were not at all prepared for such a crisis. And they had no preparation, the laws were not adapted, and the measures were not adapted. We were discussing measures, and we were already in an emergency situation. The study also confirmed that situation had very concrete consequences in all the countries. Increased school dropouts and delays in the curriculum for the kids, lack of respect for data protection, personal data protection of the students, increased cases of physical and psychological violence, as well as loneliness of the students. And of course, everywhere, the girls were the first victims of that situation. We saw also in a lot of countries violation of basic needs, such as access to health and food, which is very often linked to the participation in the school. So we anticipated also in that study, but it was revealed, strong inequalities in access to digital infrastructure and technologies and its capacity to use them. For example, 89% of the inhabitants of rural areas in sub-Saharan Africa have neither a computer nor a mobile phone. 82% of them, these inhabitants, do not have internet connection either, making, of course, distance education not possible for most of them. Furthermore, if in many countries, if in the country in the north, we were facing such a situation for the first time, most of the, not most, but a lot of countries were facing it. It's tens of millions of people as a normal routine. Let's say it was one crisis over other crises, and the problems of education and a non-permanent education due to different crises was already existing there. So pandemics, conflict, violence, natural disaster, population displacement, all that situation were coming in addition to, of course, the pandemic. So the school closure, such as the one we experienced in 2020, affected 300 million scholars in the Francophonie, and particularly the ones living in already fragile countries because of the structural weaknesses highlighted in the study. For us in the Francophonie, the right of education is fundamental and inalienable right, which must be exercised everywhere and even in time of crisis. For many children, education is a lifeline. It gives them access to protection, safety, food, health, friends, and warmth also. In the midst of the chaos, education brings hope and sense of stability for children and their families. That is why strengthening education for all is surely one of the wisest investments states can make. It is up to us as parliamentarians to convince our governments to ensure the structural and financial needs for our educational system to function properly and be prepared to crisis situations. It is also our duty to vote the budget lines supporting more fragile countries, as for them also to be able to position and respond to the enormous challenge of ensuring education in crisis. Those are some of the conclusions we had in the study, and it led, of course, to a resolution. Joseph was referring to a resolution that was adopted unanimously by the members of the Parliamentarian Francophonie, and calling for concrete investment, for solidarity, and for ambitious action to ensure the right of education for all children, even in crisis situations. That's three recommendations, but you have many others, and it was adopted. And I'm very glad today that that resolution inspired the excellent Geneva Declaration that we are here to talk about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks, David. So that's not the last we'll see of David. He's moderating the next session in the plenary. So we'll get a chance to hear more from him shortly. So Nicholas, thank you so much for that. As you say, that work was really pioneering. It gave us an example of what an assembly, a global assembly of parliamentarians can do. And in fact, we're talking to the Commonwealth Parliamentary Assembly, the English-speaking equivalent of the Francophonie, to explore the possibility of a similar kind of resolution picking up on these issues. So, colleagues, I want to now turn to Manaz Akbar Aziz, a member of the National Assembly of Pakistan. Manaz is the global co-chair of the International Parliamentary Network for Education. She's my boss, and it's great to have her here speaking on this issue. Minister, welcome. Thank you for coming from the press conference. Come and join us. And Manaz, I wanted to say two things too. One is she's also Parliamentary Secretary for Law and Justice in Pakistan, but importantly, she also established recently a parliamentary, the first in Pakistan, Child Rights Caucus. So a caucus working on children's rights in Pakistan, which is another amazing example of how parliamentarians can come together in a parliament, cross-party, and work for rights, including, of course, the right to education. Manaz, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great for me to have such a amazing constellation of stars in the education sector. To tell you, it's truly a treat, and to be sitting here with Joseph and other partners here as well. So, as David said, that education is fighting for life. And in most countries, it's true. In Pakistan, we have inflation at 32% right now. And this morning, when I tweeted a photograph of this conference, someone from my constituents wrote on that, saying that instead of talking about education, talk about putting food on the table. So that is the fight that we are fighting in our respective constituencies, in our provinces, and in our National Assembly for the space for education and for the space for voices of children. That is why I was able to advocate with the Speaker of the National Assembly and with different parties in the National Assembly to create the Parliamentary Caucus on Child Rights. And today I would like to acknowledge the role of the International Parliamentary Education Network as well. First of its own kind, the national, the international network is able to support different countries who are able to come forward in putting together the ideas that are going around locally. But the fight is actually at the ground level. We are the representatives, we are the elected representatives from our constituencies. We have to fight for women's rights, we have to fight for minority rights, we have to fight for education rights, for children's voices to be heard, and all of this is a part of my agenda daily. 21st century, and we are still counting how many women in meetings, how many women in rooms, are youth involved in the decision making or not. So pushing forward the education agenda, parliamentarians are essential to putting the education agenda on the forefront, especially when it's about budgets, political will. What the pledges that we saw today, amazing pledges. And to tell you, it's not just the executive making those decisions to cut out the money for other countries, but it is the political will of the countries. We see the political will of the countries. And today I will talk also about the crises. And when we are talking about the crisis, first of all, let me acknowledge, as was acknowledged by Gordon Brown and other successive speakers, the situation in Turkey, in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Ukraine, all of our sister countries. And we have to share the slice of the pie with everyone. So it's like I was talking to the ambassador of Turkey in Pakistan, and he said 32,000 people have vanished. And we still don't know how many children and how many schools destroyed. And I told him about this August conference and said that we will be talking about, and I'm just delighted that we are all talking about this. So the situation,
1 minute.
yeah, I'll take two. So the situation in Pakistan, you know, when the floods came, they came suddenly. We were not prepared. We were not thinking. We never thought that we will have this climate catastrophe in Pakistan. So we have right now 34,000 schools have been damaged. And 3/4 of Pakistan was like submerged in the waters, and 2.6 million school-age children are the worst affected in the region. The flood damages are, the UN has made a pledge for $40 million, and we still have received about 40% of that. So I'm saying that all the parliamentarians, the political leadership, the political will, we should all be together. And I should be standing in the parliament of Pakistan talking about the global reality, not just the Pakistani reality and not just the reality of my constituents. But we, all of us in it together, if we push for it, it will happen. But if we are lone voices in our parliaments, it will not happen. And I'm all for the declaration that is being presented today. These declarations coming together, pressurizing our respective governments, pressurizing the global reality really helps our children in these times of crisis. Thank you so much.
I think that was a very compelling first-hand articulation of why it's so important to support parliamentarians to understand the challenges and act on them. So thank you so much, Manaz, for that. So, Minister, I thank you for coming from the press conference. It's a pretty busy day for you, but it's fantastic to have you here. South Sudan, a country which in itself is conflict affected. It is, of course, a beneficiary of Education Cannot Wait support, but it's doing so much of its own volition to support education. And I asked the minister here because when I last saw her in Denmark a few weeks ago, she told me how she had been working with her fellow parliamentarians. She's a member of parliament in South Sudan, to get them to support education. And I asked her to tell us very briefly that story and what she's been doing with her peers.
Thank you very much, and I apologize. I was in another press conference with the rest of my colleagues. Thank you very much for having me in this important gathering. I think I could say political will is very important. The role of Parliament in terms of looking at the budget, when a budget is presented by the Minister of Finance, the Parliament is the last body that can cut, that can increase. But if they do not understand, if they have not been given opportunity to educate them, why do we want this budget? They will just cut and put the resources somewhere else. So what we did with Parliament was really to mobilize the parliamentarian, especially the committee that is dealing with education in our country. We felt that we need to take them through what we are doing as a government in terms of education, how many children are out of school, and how many schools we have, how many schools without water, how many children without books, the salary of the teachers, which was a peanut. So we had to mobilize all the parliamentarian. And one thing I have enjoyed is when you have the parliament on your side to make sure that everything you do is transparent, you make accountability, they're able to see that children are in classes, they have the books, the teachers are well paid. So our budget was just 6% when I came in 2020, and we could not do anything much. So what we did was to budget and also negotiate with the Minister of Finance. The most difficult area is negotiating with the Minister of Finance. I think our budget came to the cabinet 3 times and we are complaining, and then it will be sent back. At last, they agree. But when we went to Parliament, the Parliament made sure that our budget was protected completely. Nobody could touch it. So we raise now the salary of the teachers from a peanut to 140%, with additional allowances for teachers, but betterment allowance. And now we are getting back the teachers who have left the teaching profession. We have also able to provide, there were 19 children per one book. Now we are going to 1-to-1. We had also the issues of water in schools and issues to do with Corona. So we were able to get additional resources, and that's a particular will from the cabinet to do water for our schools. So I can say that education is better when the parliament is stand up to defend the budget from any cut from any corner, and when it is passed, then it is easy for the minister. Even when execution is difficult, the parliament intervene and say, "Hey, give the money to education." So this has been our experience, and I am very happy that I was one of them and able to know that education is very important for all of us, and they had a huge support for us in the country. Thank you.
I'm glad that you all clapped spontaneously in response to the minister's speech, because I was going to suggest that we give her a round of applause, because it's such a great story about the hard work that increasing education financing and improving children's access to quality education involves. And I might also add, you know, the minister has, as the co-sponsor of this event, been travelling the world arguing for funding for education cannot be made, meeting with donors, making the case, not just for South Sudan, but for the issue as a whole. And I've got to say, a lot of the success that we saw today was from government seeing the difference that she's been able to make in South Sudan and that's possible for the rest of the world. So we owe her a huge debt of gratitude for her work. Thank you. You're going. So, colleagues,
Yes, I have another meeting.
she's a pretty busy lady, so we're very grateful for her time. So, colleagues, we on the official program have about 5 minutes left, and we have quite a few people who want to say something. So I'm going to ask everyone who does speak to be very brief, because I do want to hear from you. I think we're going to go over a little, because I know that the last session ran over, but only by 5 minutes, so that you've got a short break before you go back to the plenary. Today we heard from a lot of compelling young people, very powerful remarks from them about the importance of education and the fact that they demand their right. And we're going to hear from one of them now, a young man from Nigeria, Manu, who is here. He's also a youth parliamentarian because he's part of the Nigerian Children's Parliament. Manu, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. My name is Manu, Speaker of Children's Parliament in Nigeria, and I'll be speaking to you about mobilizing political leadership for education in emergencies. At midnight of April 14, 2014, 276 female students aged 16 to 18 were kidnapped from a school. Prior to the raid, the school had been closed for 4 weeks due to deteriorating security conditions, but the girls were in attendance to take final exams in physics. On that Monday night, before the final exam, suddenly guns and explosions started all over the school. They could have run, but it was too late. All of them were taken into a long vehicle out of the school into captivity. 57 of the schoolgirls escaped immediately after the incident by jumping out of the truck, and the remaining over 219 held hostage to a destination and a fate unknown. Some escaped, some were released, and some rescued with horrific traumatic experiences and unforgettable pain. Some with babies. Girls became mothers, not by choice. According to the survivors, the rest had been killed, and some were compelled to be their wives until date. This is a story of a girl in a public secondary school in Nigeria. Education is a lifelong process that includes all the experiences children can have in both formal and informal settings. Education is a right. Education is frequently the first service to be suspended and the last function to be resumed in times of disaster. That must change. In times of crisis, leaders need to increase education financing for children to ensure that they never stop learning. Our entitlement to a safe and quality education is at risk. As children, we are among the most marginalized people in the world. I therefore call on the world leaders and humanitarian communities, first, to ensure education as human right. Humanitarian and refugee law needs to guide action to ensure that the right to education is fully respected. Two, financing education. It is critical that the world leaders, humanitarian and development agencies reinforce and support coordination arrangements to ensure that broader education and emergency priorities are not forgotten. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Manu. That was very powerful. I would love it if you were my MP. Absolutely incredible, and really to bring the situation of the girls who were abducted in Nigeria and remind us of that, which happened a long time ago but still remains unresolved, I think is fantastic. And so thank you for doing that. Yeah, really appreciate it. Manu talked there about the situation for refugees, and some of you will recall that actually in 2019 we met in Geneva for the first Global Refugee Forum, and that was for the adoption of the Global Compact on Refugees, a new way of trying to respond to the needs of displaced persons. And in particular, one of the pillars of that approach was to ensure that they got access to education. So that was a big feature of the Global Compact. And in fact, the Global Refugee Forum, the second of its kind, will happen later this year in December. And I'm delighted that our colleagues from UNHCR are here. And I want to call on Shafak Pave. Shafak is actually a former member of parliament in Turkey and now is in the political section at UNHCR. And she's just going to tell us a little bit about the importance of political leadership in delivering the pledges that were made at the Global Refugee Forum in 2019. Shafak.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for also including us to voice our support for the Geneva Declaration to start with, and for the leadership role that you are playing in convening parliamentary voices that are actually showing such a solidarity globally here, moving beyond and above the humanitarian crisis geographically across the world right now. And I would like to thank the members of the parliaments from South Sudan, the minister, and Pakistan and Swiss National Council very much for strongly committing through this event and showing an exemplary role modeling for others to follow. When we first met, International Parliamentary Network for Education is a close partner to us since its inception, which is young but powerfully growing globally as well, which is we are proud partners. And in the build up to what Joseph has mentioned, the Global Refugee Forum that's coming up and will be held in Geneva 13 to 15 December, I would like to recall some of the recommendations from the roundtable that we put together last year for the parliamentary action in response to the challenges which humanitarian crisis pose to education. That was made there and then by the participation of members of parliament from all across the world and from different regions. So one is, and that is what will guide us actually in our partnership. Work with budget committees to increase domestic financing for education and also international financing for education, which was voiced by your support as well. Oversee implementation of education policies, and let us not forget the most important is burden sharing principle that is shown for the host countries that are ready and pledging on the policy changes and reforms as well for inclusive national educations. So I would like to make that call to pay an attention to that as well for the matching support. Strengthening engagement with all influential actors to actually provide quality education equally for refugees. Let us not forget, for those of us in the humanitarian field, we know it is a protection tool. It's a safe environment. It is also a must for social cohesion that we all desire for. So, and mobilize concrete efforts to bridge the digital divide. Just to wrap up, and these are the principles that came out from that roundtable, the consultation we held, thanks to our partnership with International Parliamentary Network for Education. That will guide us in our work in the build-up to the next Global Refugee Forum. And just in my personal capacity as being the former member of parliament in Turkey as well, I would like to just express gratitude for the solidarity that has been shown. As we see both for the people of Syria and Turkey, this is going to be a long recovery, just like Pakistan after the floods. So in fact, education may be the only space that we may actually be able to offer protection for both Syrian refugees in Turkey, as well as the people of Turkey, the host community. So thank you very much. I just wanted to say that from the bottom of my heart with the gratitude. Thank you.
Shafak, thank you so much. Thanks for the partnership and thank you for your reminder and remarks. And of course, our condolences in respect of the terrible disaster that's affected Turkey. I have to say, when the UN Special Envoy asked us all to stand this morning, there was dust in the room because I was getting teary because I thought that was a very powerful way of standing in solidarity with the people of Turkey and Syria. So we do that here today too with you. Thank you. Colleagues, I just want to round out Shafak's contribution with calling on the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Population, Refugees, Migration at the US State Department, the executive side of government, but obviously critical to the implementation of the world's commitments to refugees. Marta, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Joseph. I would like to just foot stomp a little bit on the Global Refugee Forum. As I've traveled around the world, what I have seen is a lot of the communities who are hosting refugees are really facing unsurmountable challenges themselves. You know, there's just enormous impact on them. And so it's imperative that we gain their support. So I would just like to appeal to colleagues here that we really do use the upcoming Global Refugee Forum as a way to show our solidarity and support for refugee hosting countries throughout the world so that they can be committed to allowing this access to education for those who are displaced. And I know we're short on time, so I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely, thank you. So a key feature of that global compact was the inclusion of refugee kids in national systems. But in order to do that, many of the countries that we're talking about already are very stretched for their own populations. I noticed the minister from Lebanon is here. Welcome, minister. You know, difficult situation, hosting a large population of refugees. I also then just want to turn quickly to my colleague Nima Lugangira. Nima is from Tanzania, and I know that she wanted to share exactly that point about not forgetting the needs of countries that are hosting large populations of displaced persons. Nima.
Thank you very much. As introduced, I'm Nima Lugangira. I'm a member of parliament from Tanzania, but also the African rep to the International Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance. What I quickly wanted to say is very often when we're talking about, education in emergencies, we focus on countries that are having the emergencies, but we should also remember countries that are hosting our comrades and families and friends from those countries. A good example is Tanzania. Tanzania has been historically known to host our neighbors from different African countries. So it's very important to make sure when we're having these funding structures, we also remember those countries, because oftentimes you find that, I would be in engagements and I would ask, is Tanzania one of the countries? And you'd get a response that Tanzania is not a priority country. But then you're like, when there's a crisis, we are the ones who would jump at making sure that we provide the necessary shelter and needs to our neighbors. So it's very important to get that balance, and that is what I wanted to reaffirm here today. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Nima. And maybe just to say, I know I curtailed Manaz's remarks, but I know that she was also going to remind us, in addition to the impact of the floods in Pakistan, that Pakistan has hosted refugees for many years, one of the largest refugee populations in the world, largely from Afghanistan, but not just. And obviously that situation continues to deteriorate. So colleagues, I want to wrap up. Before I do also want to acknowledge that there's lots of other colleagues in the room. My colleague Mike Lake, another member of IPNED, represents North America. He's here and got a shout out when Canada was pledging earlier today, which is terrific. And I also just wanted to acknowledge that Fawzia Kufi's here. You heard from her earlier, and if you want to, you can come to a side event tomorrow morning and hear from her and the other Afghan women speakers. But what's really interesting about Fawzia is she was the Deputy Speaker, first woman, of course, of the Parliament in Afghanistan, and a Member of Parliament. And she's kind of like a Member of Parliament now without constituency, because of course the government, the Parliament which she represented no longer exists, but it doesn't stop her performing her role of being an advocate, a representative, and trying to shape international policy and support for Afghanistan. And she's a fantastic person to collaborate with, and a real example to us all and to parliamentarians of the commitment that they bring to their office. And I want to acknowledge that here today. So I want to acknowledge the work of everyone, let you go to the next session. Thank you so much for this. Take a copy of the declaration with you and promote it, and encourage your parliamentarians above all to act on it. Thank you.